If you're a sim racer, driving in the wet can get frustrating, because while you can drive a certain way in the dry, trying that in the wet will end up in a trip to the barrier. But as they say, rain is the great equaliser. It requires driving techniques that may seem bizarre in the dry, and knowledge about what you can and can't do on the track. So in this video we'll go through how to adapt to wet weather driving. Firstly, we'll talk about the driving techniques you'll need to employ in order to maximise your driving potential, and then we'll discuss the do's and don'ts of what you can do on a wet track. By the end you should be able to take to the rain-sodden tarmac and push to the limit. If this is the sort of content you like to watch, don't forget to subscribe and keep up to date on our weekly videos. So let's start with driving techniques. There are various different ways you can enhance your wet weather driving skills, and we'll start with throttle modulation. This is where you gradually apply throttle out of the corner. Now this is general advice that can be applied anywhere, but in the wet, getting on the throttle too soon usually means spinning out of control. Modulating the throttle is necessary to accelerate at the highest possible rate without losing traction, and on a slippery surface like a wet track, it is critical to modulate the accelerator in order to maximise your car's performance. Next is braking. Now there are a few techniques you can use to help wet weather driving, but we're going to focus on just two: progressive braking and trail braking. Both of these techniques are helpful in slowing down weight transfer and keeping the car stable. Progressive braking is where you gradually go onto the brakes rather than just slamming them on. This is particularly useful if the approach to a corner isn't straight, or in this case, if the track is wet. It allows the weight transfer from back to front to be slow, ensuring the car doesn't jolt out of control on braking. Trail braking, as you probably know, is gradually lifting off the brake into a corner, keeping the weight over the front axle, which gives additional front end grip into the corner and keeps the weight transfer from front to back slow, which ensures the car doesn't spin out of control. Trail braking in the wet can actually make it easy to lose the rear end, so it's best to not use it too heavily and just be gentle with it. Keeping that weight transfer gentle means the car will be more stable through the braking zone, and this means you'll be less likely to throw the car out of control. Now, speaking of throwing the car out of control, sometimes you may need to invoke a slight weight transfer to help the car turn. We've spoken in the past about how you can use pedals to help the car turn, but these tips can equally aid with the wet weather driving. This is more aimed at cars with less aerodynamic and mechanical grip. You can help the car rotate with a sudden brake usage, which destabilises the car, and if you use this technique incorrectly, will naturally spin the car. But used correctly, you can make the car turn in more sharply with a quick use of brake pressure. Finally, on driving techniques is short shifting. Naturally, in racing you want to use the entire rev range, as towards the top end is where the car produces the most power. However, when the car is producing that maximum power output, the car is susceptible to braking traction as the tyres struggle to cope with the power. So to prevent this, you can short shift, which is where you change up while the revs are lower than where you'd normally change up from. This helps make sure the tyres aren't overloaded with power, and combined with throttle modulation, it means exiting a corner keeps the car stable and additionally saves you time later as you've already shifted up gears. Now we're ready to get on track, but even with these driving techniques, you will still end up facing backwards if you aren't careful. Let's talk about racing lines. Standard racing lines include the racing school line, wide entry, tight apex and wide exit, but in wet conditions this is far from ideal. Firstly, this is a very smooth line, meaning the front tyres are loaded throughout the whole corner. This relies on the tyres gripping into the tarmac, which in the wet becomes problematic. To resolve this, a more V-shaped racing line will mean you don't spend as much time turning and will prevent loading the tyres. Additionally, taking the inside line, or indeed any part of the conventional racing line, will also be a problem. In the dry, rubber from the tyres gets stuck onto the tarmac under load, which is great when it's dry as it will give you extra grip, but in the wet, a surface of water will make rubber seem like ice. This is particularly prominent in Assetto Corsa Competizione, where you'll notice the apex grip in the wet is pretty much non-existent. So to get around this issue, break a car split from the edge of the track to avoid the racing line on entry, which allows you to brake later, and then take a slightly wider line through the corner to avoid the rubbered in racing line on the apex, as you'll notice there is more grip with the wet weather tyres out there. It's good to experiment with the lines and find out where the most grip is. Of course, each corner will require a slightly different line, so if you're unsure, do a few laps, experiment with lines, and then look at your theoretical best session data on Track Titan. See what line is the best for each individual corner. From there, you can build your wet weather prowess. By signing up on Track Titan with the code WET24, you can get 30 days of unlimited data insights for free. Next up is the curbs. There are pros and cons to using the curbs in the rain. Firstly, you can use high inside curbs on slow corners to put more weight on the outside tyre, and therefore the car will turn faster around the corner. However, curbs cause instability in the car and they can initiate a loss in traction going on or coming off the curb if you're not careful. In iRacing, using the curbs is almost like a death sentence. Just while filming this video, I found that out the hard way. If you do use curbs in iRacing, take particular care as they will punish you for any wrong move. Thankfully, other titles such as ACC and F124 are fairly forgiving when it comes to curbs, so you can take full advantage of them. Regardless of the title though, you will always need to take care when using race or flat curbs. Finally, let's talk about track undulation and elevation. Coming over a hill, for example, can lift the suspension on the car slightly up, meaning there is less weight on the tyres, making them easier to lose traction. iRacing is particularly problematic for this. Coming over the slight crest on the start-finish straight at Alton Park, for example, is a place where you should take particular care in iRacing. Other titles seem slightly less susceptible to this in comparison, but it should still be a consideration to take care when the road isn't completely flat. There is plenty to digest and concern yourself over here, like with sim racing in general, but thankfully there is a way to see exactly where you can improve. Track Titan can not only show your session insights right down to your throttle and brake traces, but can also provide personalised tips based on your individual performance. Additionally, as you start to get more accustomed to the platform, you can toggle on advanced mode, which allows you to view the data the way professional drivers would do in real life. Across different cars, tracks and games, you can compare your session data to players around the world, including professional esports drivers. By signing up on Track Titan with the code WET24, you can get 30 days of unlimited data insights for free to help you get quicker. No credit card details needed, just record a session and analyse away. But back to wet weather. It's a very difficult situation to master, and even what we've spoken about in this video is barely scraping the surface. There's plenty of even more advanced tips that we could spend all day trying to explain, but our top tips for getting started is avoid the rubbered in racing lines, take care with weight transfer on the brake and accelerator, make sure you utilise short shifting to its potential, take care on the curbs, and be sure to always take care with any track undulation and elevation. There's a million different things waiting to throw your car off the road in the wet, and the more you prepare and plan for, the less you will find yourself in a barrier.